There's an archaeological point here that I think is really cool, though. And it's another connection between Paul and Luke also. A guy named Erastus. Paul writes in Romans 16 about Erastus, the city treasurer. So he's talking about the treasurer of Corinth. And then he says again in 2 Timothy, there's Erastus again. He remained at Corinth. So in Romans he says Erastus is a treasurer, and in Timothy he says he's at Corinth. And then Luke also records Erastus in Acts 19. So send him to Macedonia, two of those who ministered to him, Timothy and Erastus. So now we have a connection between Erastus and Timothy, and it makes sense that Paul's mentioning Erastus to his letter in Timothy now, right? Because he knows that these guys work together. So you have a connection between all these four people: Paul, Luke, Timothy, and Erastus. And what we learn about Erastus is he was in Corinth, he's a city treasurer. And there's a really cool archaeological finding. So this is a first century tablet right here. And you can see there's a person standing there, so it's pretty big. This is about as tall as a person. And apparently it was connected to some kind of pavement or walkway in Corinth. And they know it's first century text based on the way it's written, the structure of the letters, the uncial text being all capitals, which was there for the first few centuries. So they said they know that they can identify this as a first century stone work, okay? And what it says is, Erastus, in return for his aedileship, meaning an elected government position, laid the pavement at his own expense. So talking about the pavement it was connected to. So he laid this at his own expense. Erastus, in return for his aedileship, laid at his own expense. So it's basically saying Erastus got elected to be some kind of government servant, and he laid this pavement with his own money for having been elected. Apparently this was some kind of, maybe a promise he had made to somebody to help him get elected or something. But, or maybe it was just a good thing he did. I mean, he had the money to do it, and maybe he served. But what we learned, what we know through Paul and Luke was he was a treasurer at Corinth, right? And right here you've got a first century Erastus being elected to a government position, laying some pavement as an own expense, which just sounds like a pretty nice Christian thing to do, right? Like, oh, I got the extra money. We really need a walkway here, so I'll just put it there. So pretty cool. And I think you can actually see his name right here. The E looks like it's broken off, but, the letters are obviously different, but the AST looks the same. This V would be a U. I can't read Greek, though, but I can make out his name there at least. That's awesome. I think that's really cool that archaeology validates the connection between these men, and the Bible actually gives us the history about this piece of rock, which is pretty cool, right? And archaeology is great. I think this is fun. All right, before we do that one, here's a fun fact. There's a historian named Colin Hemmer who identified 84 facts in the last 16 chapters of Acts that were confirmed as true historical facts through archaeological findings. Why he chose the last 16 chapters of Acts, I don't know. I don't know why. This is just what I've heard. So there's a ton of archaeology backing up the Bible. And we've already gone through some of it. I know we went through some of the Old Testament too. So I'm just gearing towards the New Testament here now. So this is an ossuary. That's a bone box. So they put the bones of dead people in there. And that is Caiaphas's bone box. So he was the high priest who ordered Jesus' crucifixion, or pushed it along at least until it got to Pilate at least. His bones were found in 1990. So one thing we can rest assured is that the guy who killed Jesus is dead. Thank God. Hopefully he got saved. I actually think he committed suicide. I think Josephus records that he committed suicide a few years later. So maybe he got saved first, but probably not. It sounds like he probably didn't get saved if he committed suicide, or else he wouldn't have committed suicide, I would think. Pilate stone.
He's the only Caiaphas that we have that's ever recorded as well.
Yeah. Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So it wasn't a common name.
Yeah.
Very cool. The Pilate Stone. So it says to the divine Augusti Tiberium, and then it's cut off, so they're missing some text. But Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, has dedicated this. We don't know what it says after that. But basically, you've got this piece of archaeology linking Pilate to being a leader in Judea. So the guy who was head of what the Gospels record as him being the Roman head who ultimately ordered Jesus' crucifixion, we know now can connect him to the time and place of being exactly what the Gospel says about him. There's a lot of Jewish coins here. So this is from the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C. Highly recommend the trip for everybody. So some first century Jewish coins. This one's about from the Jewish revolt in the 67 to 68 AD, or CE is what they say now, minted in Jerusalem. So when Jerusalem rebelled sometime after Jesus, they made some of their own coins because they didn't want to be Roman anymore. So obviously they rejected the Roman coins. So these were Jewish coins. These 4 were all from that time period. But you've got Roman coins too. So this is a silver dollar of Vespasian. This is a bronze coin of Titus. This is a bronze coin of Titus also. These are from the same time period, the 60 to 69 to 70 AD. Apparently these were all found together, so they're from the same few years. But that's pretty cool. That's pretty awesome, right? Very cool history there. And we know that 70 AD was an important time for biblical history, even though the Bible was, happening a few years before that. This is what Jesus prophesied of, that no stone would be left upon the temple. The whole city was destroyed by Rome, and they did destroy the temple. And so when the Jews rebelled in the mid-60s AD, it took until about 70 AD when Rome came and destroyed them. What happened was Jerusalem's got 3 layers of walls. There's the original Jerusalem, the Old Testament Jerusalem. Then they built layers of walls. They had 3 layers of walls. And so Rome had a really hard time getting the Jews out of Jerusalem because they had layers of walls, and they kept so they started by basically the guy who led the attack as a Roman camp. He didn't do a great job by building a siege wall around. Usually you build a wall around the city to keep everyone in. If you want to first off get them in, don't let them get resources in and out. They skipped that until like halfway through the siege. So that was a mistake that Rome made, and it allowed the Jews to have a little extra help. Also, they had, as Rome invaded, they'd bottleneck them into the holes in the wall, and so they'd be able to fight them on a kind of one-to-one basis. So Rome's numbers didn't help as they tried to get through the walls. And what happened was, as they got through one wall, there were certain layers of walls. They just build up the next layer of wall and come behind it. So Rome had probably like one of the worst siege campaigns that they ever had to try to get rid of the Jews out of Jerusalem. And ultimately, it ended up with the temple burning. Things caught on fire. One of the Romans got in a window, threw some fire in there, and some of the linens went up, and it smoked out the Jews, and they ended up destroying the temple. But pretty nasty warfare, even around the temple. The Jews fought very hard as they got through their last line of defense. Their second to last line of defense after they got through the first 2 layers of walls was at the temple. And so it was in that temple court that some of the most vicious warfare. And they set up some nasty traps for the Romans too. They had the Romans run on a wall, and they took out the wall from under them and collapsed it on them. They lit stuff on fire underneath them. The whole battle was going on in the courtyards. The Roman numbers didn't help much. They'd just pin them down there and just start launching stuff at them. And it was when the temple went up that morale really fell, and Rome eventually took over and leveled the city. And ultimately the Jews, that wasn't the end of the rebellion either. The end of the rebellion was at a place called Messina, which was actually a rock fortress in the mountains. And it was basically an isolated, flat little mountain type fortress. So it was basically just a giant fortress where it was big enough that you could farm on top of it. And there was walls at the top, but there was nothing around it. It was basically an isolated, like little sloped area with a flat top. So they had a fortress at the top that you'd have to climb up to get into. And if you tried to climb up, you're just getting arrows and rocks dropped on your head. So what Rome did is they actually built a wedge. They built a mountain going up to the mountain, and it took them a long time. It took them I want to say it took a couple months. So they literally just blocked out the arrows and just built a mountain up to it. So an insane work of military might by the Romans. And actually that mountain that they built is still there today. If you go to Messina, you can see the ruins of the fortress that's there. And you can see the mountain that was built up to it. There's a nice slope going up to it. And what Josephus records is that the Jews committed suicide at the top when the Romans finally got in. They had a siege tower up that mountain, right? So you know those big tall wood towers, and they lit the thing on fire. But the wall that the Jews had built was also made of wood and stone, so the wood on their wall lit on fire. So when the Romans got to the top, there was just fires going off on both sides. And so it's ugly warfare there also. The Jews just put up a heck of a fight. And what Josephus records is that the remaining few people, the ones that didn't starve to death in there, committed suicide before the Romans got to them. I watch videos. Here's a bronze coin of Pontius Pilate they actually date it 30. So the year of Jesus' death. A Pilate coin. Pretty cool.